Now that we've gotten all of that, let's talk about the next part, which is, again, while you're playing the game, comeback opportunities are extremely limited, right? So I told you that batteries are extreme. Oh, don't worry, it'll be cut off YouTube. Batteries are extremely bad as a comeback mechanic because they're the only comeback mechanic. Killing enemy bases is extremely difficult. The opportunity cost of traveling this enormous map is very high, right? You can snipe creeps and get them back from other people, right? But you have to be able to snipe them. Like, sniping them is very good, but you have to do it without losing a lot in exchange. This is very hard because the heroes of Blockade and Castiel are extremely sticky and can follow you and can beat up a good portion of your army, or at least stun it into submission afterwards. This makes it very hard for you to actually come back. Now, another problem is, well, we can kind of harass creeps, but not really. We can harass expansions, but it's extremely expensive. Damaging the core doesn't much work. So what resources do we have to come back into the game? And the answer for that is nothing. There really was no good way to come back into the game. That even if you were to give someone who is very strong a losing position and say, how do you play this position? It would have to be them winning 1v2 army fights over and over and over and over in order for them to actually make some meaningful comeback in this scenario. Like, this is a massive problem when it comes to the world of Team Mayhem 3v3. And the fact, by the way, is this combines with the player problem that I discussed already. And what do I mean by that? We have to keep asking if we're okay because we keep losing attention. Hi, I recognize a bunch of names in chat right now. Y'all are real ones. So the biggest problem that this game has is, one, you knew if you won or lost starting on the selection screen when you found out who was on your team and who was not. Two, even if the game was somewhat even, coming back into the game almost never happened, right? And three, there was just a huge problem with the game's ending. So I already talked about how when the game is going on and you're playing it, you lose or win immediately on 0 second mark on team because of the huge difference between these player groups, between casuals and extremely bad competitive players, and on the other side, people who are literally semi-pro and winning money in other tournaments and coasting through games and getting organized teams. Then you lose slowly in the game itself, because we already talked about, this is a big pet peeve of mine, actually. I'm fucking pissed about this. So one pet peeve I had inside of Team Mayhem 3v3 is, you might say, yeah, but if I'm losing, then I just lose and it happens quickly, right? Nope, that's the worst part, I think, about a Team Mayhem, is that if you were losing, unless it was a giga stomp, and we mean like 3 people, I'm not exaggerating, I'm not making fun of these people, it's just true. If there were 3 people with a combined APM of 100 versus 3 people with a combined APM of 750, the game might end in 4.5 to 5 minutes. Right? But every other time, that's not how it ended. You simultaneously had no way of coming back into the game, but the victory condition taking so long that good players would squeeze the victory out of you. And what do I mean by that? So eventually, the better team has more expansions than you, so they have more passive income. Because they have power passive income, they have a bigger army than you, which means that they can get the creeps and rotate better than you can with less risk. So you slowly lose more and more and more freedom to position around the map and move around the map. And then what happens is that team has to take steps to start winning the game. The best way for them to win the game is not to get batteries. I already told you that that's a trap. And it's not to sit in front of the core and siege it, although that happens a couple minutes later. The best way for a good team to beat you was for them to gather 2 or 3v1 and destroy bases, because they finally have such an overwhelming advantage that it is not an opportunity cost for them to move around the map and stomp your base out of existence. Now, what this would leave is, especially for the people who were bad, in a relative skill sense, were very bad, or the worst team, or the worst players, they would get mad and pissed, and I will not say their names, not happening, but there were people who would rage like a motherfucker because they would be squeezed out of a game. They would have their bases killed, and then there's an invulnerable section behind your core where none of your buildings and units can get hit, but your income is so low, and you have so little tech, and you have so little map pressure, that the only thing left for the winning team to do after they killed all of your bases was to siege your core. And the way they sieged your core, because it's not invulnerable, you can just attack it, you don't need the batteries in this system, is they would make an arc that was something like 50 to 60% of the arc of the core itself, and they would just ping it at range. And the core, because it was not invulnerable but also was not meant to be cheesed, had a ton of health. So you just had a massive army sitting on your core, wailing on your core for 1.5 to 2 minutes after they slowly squeezed you out of the game. So this means that the game did not end in some emphatic, explosive fashion, right? Okay, I want you to imagine League of Legends, right? You're imagining the Nexus in League of Legends. I want you to imagine that that Nexus has 10 to 20 times its current health. You know how when you watch any professional game, right? All that core is going down immediately. It gets burst really quickly. Things are doing huge chunks of damage to it with autos and with abilities, right? Now imagine it had 20 times its health, and all of the players in the game were just forced to sit there and watch as the core slowly gets exploded. This works in League of Legends. I use that because it's a very popular game, guys. It's not because I don't know of other games, obviously. But, 1 second, is this not... There we go. Okay, sick. So, I want you to imagine sitting there in a game, watching your core. So you've been playing, the game was decided on minute 0. Let's say it was an even game and you got lucky. The major creep fight that decides the game is happening at 1.5 to 2 minutes in the upper right side of the base, right? You then play another 6 or 7 minutes before the enemy team starts attacking your expansions, and you have no ability to counter-harass them, and the only comeback mechanics in the game actively cause you to go into a bigger deficit, right? So imagine how horrible that would feel. And then when you combine all of this together, you finally, your reward for getting slowly choked out, like bit by bit with the tiniest bit of thumb pressure ever, is that you then get to watch your main base die for 2 minutes. And actually, there were people who mauled it off the face of the earth, raged and like yelled obscenities, and quit the playtest. Yes, more of them on the casual side or the bad competitive players side, but also some of them at a very high level, right? Just saw this and they were like, yeah, this isn't fun. By the way, that's the worst possible thing that you can hear. Again, I told you, if you're in the middle bracket of Team Mayhem, it's a wonderful, happy, beautiful, virulently joyous experience. But if you were in a team that was getting mismatched one way or the other, it wasn't fun to win because you didn't win quickly. You had to play this slow plotting game that felt like diplomacy meets civilization on times 0.25 turn rate speed. And if you're losing, it's even worse because you're getting beaten. There were even people who quit the playtest because they said, oh, I hate getting trolled by all of these good players who just sweat all the time and do nothing but that. And I'm trying to be an interpreter between like two different worlds here. And I would explain to these people, guys, they're not choking you out because they want to do that. They think it's boring to win this way. They just are winning the way that they are allowed to win. It's not their fault it takes 1.5 minutes to burn through the core. It's not their fault that every comeback mechanic benefits the team that is ahead more than it benefits the team that was behind. You guys can't see it right here, but Senna says there wasn't defender's advantage with the given core and base layouts either, because the defender would always be walking into the attacker's conclave. Yes, and so there was no breaking out is the problem. Remember that big monster I told you about that spawns and it goes towards the core and it attacks it? That was probably the only time that the attacking team just won outright, just smashed and won ahead of the schedule that I said here, but it did it in an extremely unsatisfying way, because now instead of there being an insurmountable unit benefit on the side of the attackers where they have full map control, there's nothing you can do when you've been losing for 4 minutes in a row. Now you have the opposite problem, which is there is this enormous beast that is walking towards you, and even if your team is even to the other team in a fight, you need 2 or 3 armies worth of focus fire to kill this monster. So they just had a good chance of killing you. Now, there were even some bugs that made this even funnier. So there was a bug where you could cause 2 of the monsters to spawn. There was a while where Blockade, the Vanguard hero, has a healing ability. You could just heal the monster with Vanguard and Medtechs that had basically like instant cast auto nanoswarm, and their auto attacks would slow enemies, attack speed and movement speed near them. And that was even worse because, oh, but it ends more quickly, right? Yeah, it ends more quickly, but it's because you're killing the equivalent of like a Final Fantasy door monster. I'm sure you guys know this, right? I'm not the only one. So it's a classic thing in Final Fantasy is to have a boss who does no damage, and all it does is give status conditions to your party, and it's always moving closer. And when it gets all the way to the end, it just crushes your entire force, and all of your units die. And it's called a beef gate negatively, because the whole purpose of that is to just say, hey, if you don't have enough gear to do enough damage to this monster, then you won't be able to survive the future parts of the game. So we're just going to kill you here and force you to level grind a little bit, right? Except there was no level grinding out of this problem. You just instantly lost because a thing that had the effective hit points of 2 armies showed up and started clawing at your base. Yep. Yep, it was like a gear check or an enrage mode. Exactly. Yes, exactly, Senna. Again, you guys can't see it on the thing that I'm recording right now, but Senna says gear checks and enrage modes. For anyone who hasn't played, it's the same kind of logic of the enrage mode or a berserk mode is just a thing that the game does to say, all right, well, you have to clear, and Destiny 2 does this a lot as well, where you have to clear this breakpoints in terms of total damage, because if you don't, the boss just throws up its arms and slams them back down and wipes you all out. And so the problem too is, now you might say, but Atano, you're only looking at the negatives. Surely there were positives to these player skill interactions. Like, what happened when 2 casual groups of players played together? I actually think that, so unfortunately, I don't get to play those games, right? Because I'm at some intermediate or journeyman level of skill, right? And unfortunately, being above that skill level and knowing any of these metagame concepts completely fucked up the entire mode for people. But if you were below that level, below my skill level, at least decently, or below my metagame awareness, or below my level of cynicism, which I heard someone call it once, whatever you want to call it, watching those games was a lot of fun. Now, it was like looking at, I won't say one continent, but you can figure it out. It was like looking at some less developed group or organization, right? Now, not because they were stupid, but because I thought, well, why don't they do this? They could win if they do this. But the ignorance of the people who were playing the game mode in those lower skilled lobbies actually allowed them to play what looked like Team Mayhem was intended to be. Right, this like casual, fun, free-for-all area of play. They looked like they were having a blast, and I didn't want to be the person who was like, stop having fun, you're not having fun correctly. Like, you know, you just leave those people be. A lot of the strong player, weak player discussion got very hard. So feedback, right? Well, we'll finish this first, but keep the idea of feedback in your mind. So the second part was, now what about really good players? What about like just everyone who's really good, like Mixu level people, right? What if they just queue up and play? Well, those games played out exactly the way I said they did for intermediate players, because these are the players who are setting up the concepts. And I will tell you, people who like competition despise knowing that they lose out of hand. Right? They want to have some feeling of getting back into it, some low percentage chance that, or an out. It's in Magic, we call them outs. Like, it's playing to the idea that you are going to lose, but there is something you could do that mitigates the advantage your opponent has long enough that luck could play a factor for you. This is something that Wolf Glick over at Wolfie VGC for Pokemon Video Game Championships, the 2v2 Nintendo format, talks about a lot. A lot of really strong players talk about this idea of how do you play if you're up against someone or a team of people who are better than you, right? It's the idea of anti-stratting and Counter-Strike, right? These are the concepts that people are really interested in and really focus on. And those players found out there was nothing. This same kind of path that I'm talking about worked. And also, remember that hero balance issue? Well, you might have mistakenly believed that you were playing a MOBA, you know, where for at least the last 15 years, you're just not allowed to have two of the same character on your. You were never allowed to have two of the same character on your team. And increasingly in the modern era, if one team picks character A, the second team can't have character A as well. That would be absolutely insane. So what ended up happening, though, is that because there's only 3 heroes in the game, none of that happened. So you were just allowed to have triple Malak if you wanted to, because some of his base units were extremely good, like the Fire Giant. You could just have, if you wanted to, double or triple Castiel, and just have people stacking up absurd auto attack buffs with attack resets and dash resets that lets them move around the map and makes the concept of early game armies completely immaterial, because it's just a MOBA, but they're the only S tier character, right? So they decided, this shit fucking sucks. And by the way, that is the way I heard in those chats those strong players say it. I don't know, like, look, okay, I'm not going to name names because obviously a lot of these people were able to say that because at the time it was under NDA, and at the time none of those conversations are leaked or managed to other people. You would not even be allowed to complain about the person making that complaint in the main Stormgate Discord, right? You could dislike them for your own private reasons, but you couldn't give impressions of Team Mayhem or the fact that these players caused those impressions in Team Mayhem or caused negative impressions of your negative impressions of them because of Team Mayhem, right? But I will just tell you, as someone who was in those calls for many hours, right, that this shit fucking sucks was a sentence that was said in some variant or form a lot by really strong players. Or, I'm not playing this garbage, or lol in regards to patch notes, right? Now, again, you have to understand competitive players want to win, and they want to win the game in a manner that they think expresses their skill, right? Whatever the promise is of skill that they are representing inside of the game, they want to be able to display that. And a lot of these people just thought, well, what's the point in playing a game where I have one thing that I can do, I can't group with all of my allies to force these 3v3s the way that I want them to. There's no comeback potential, and there were people who were just quitting games after 2 minutes because they're just like, oh, well, we lost the upper fight in a bad manner. I'm not going to play this for another 7 minutes to figure it out. Or, you know that idea in that harasses League of Legends and Korean solo queue of just open mid. Open mid happens so much. I've never actually seen a team game, where open mid equivalency, or the idea of just openly giving up, happened so much for a game that was in beta. Like, or the game mode was in beta. It's just the idea that people would just be like, fuck this, I'm out, like, you can go do whatever, I'm gonna go, I don't know, watch a YouTube video, listen to an audio book, start dinner, do literally anything else but continue to play this game where I am always gonna be at a 40% win rate that depreciates rapidly for every game second that goes through. The patches were a fucking travesty, and it's a shame because actually I think that this is the idea of feedback came into this problem. So, okay, so we're going to do an intervention right now for any semi-pros who are listening and any of those really bad competitive or truly casual players who are listening. Okay, we're going to start with the casual players, right? Don't worry, we'll start with you, and we got something for those really good players next. Casual players, when you are complaining about something and you are asking how to get better, do not complain if the answer is something that you don't like. So, for instance, if you are doing something and it's really bad, and you ask a better player what you should have been doing, those better players really care about the idea of improving and being good at something. So they will tell you that you were shit at doing something, or you did something completely wrong, or you fucked it up. So don't voice those grievances if you don't want those results, okay? That is the way that those stronger players' minds are oriented. They are solution-oriented, and as I said, most of them care way fucking more about the competitive aspect of the game, of competing against other people, of, like, battling they wouldn't say these words, but, like, battling their mental taxonomies and experience against each other. They care way more about that than what opinion you have on balance as a fucking, like, 10 APM player. Now, Don't worry, strong players, semi-pros, you're going to get this shit too. You have to understand something. If you are a semi-pro or a really good player, and this is a cross-connect, like a cross-failing I saw in all the feedback. So we explained, it's very easy to be like, oh, this is what bad players said. Good players, semi-pros, people like that. Something that they overwhelmingly, not all of them, but most of them do not understand, is that a bad player says this feels bad. That is not a translation of how do I beat it. I know that's actually an insanely foreign concept, at least in this point, right? But a lot of strong players take this feels bad and they're interpreting it because they have been in that scenario themselves, and because they have this mentality of improving, they understand the words this feels bad as a translation meaning I am frustrated by this interaction that I lost. How do I win it? They do not understand that bad players can simply say that what they are playing does not feel good to them. So let me give an example, right? If you are told, so if a bad player said batteries, so if a strong player says batteries are bad, it's just the case. Batteries are really shit in Team Mayhem, right? They were a comeback mechanic that favored the team that was ahead. So they are actually an inverted success of, like they're the inversion of success in terms of a design principle or what they're meant to do for the game mode. That strong player says that. They're stating a fact. Batteries are bad. If a weaker player, or if even an intermediate, but if a weak player or a bad competitive player or a casual player says, well, I don't think batteries should be bad, right? Or I don't understand why, or what they say, let's see, it feels bad that batteries are bad, right? Or I don't understand why batteries are bad. Strong player will hear that and think, okay, well, clearly you don't understand that this comeback mechanic operates in this way, that there are checks and balances to what resources you're getting and expending, and actually the battery is poor for those reasons. That's not what the bad player is saying. What the bad player is saying is the promise that these batteries suggest as a comeback mechanic feels at odds with what result I get when I use them. They're not asking how to increase their win percentage. They're asking that the fundament of batteries be changed such that it aligns to what their headcanon is of what they should be doing. And again, strong players think that they are being magnanimous when they are explaining, yeah, they're just bad, don't get them. So the big divide, the big like seismic break, the TLDR version, okay? Strong players are discussing the game in the context of what it is now. They're solution-oriented towards solving the problem of winning based on what the game is now. Bad players or weak players are describing what they want the game to be. They have like an aspiration for the change of the system and of the game. This is why you listen to really good players talk about balance, but also why, in my experience, really good players don't tend to know what they're talking about in design. This is also why really bad players tend to have and attack more fundamental design problems when they give feedback. But a bad player's idea of what to do for balance is wildly and hilariously wrong. And because neither side sees the value in either one, because there is a transformational process as you go from being bad to being good, you assume that you think the same way now as when you're good as you did when you were bad. This tanked the fucking feedback of Team Mayhem, by the way, because the dev team, as far as I can discern from private conversations that they're private, so I'm not going to share them, but I had private conversations with these people. The developers of the game mode, or the people balancing the game mode, because those are not one and the same, did not understand this disconnect between the two groups, right? They had no understanding of what the balance would be necessary to change the numbers to make the game more amenable and fair to strong players, and they did not understand the grievances of the frustrating play experience that the bad players did. And I would suspect, it might be going over a line to say, that is because most of the developers were themselves intermediate to tier players who had not had this metagame like foisted on them or introduced to them or learned by them. So they were living in a happy playland where everything is fine because they were not testing the boundaries. They were not so skilled that they were testing boundaries, but they were also not so bad that they were able to just have no agency and see these problems like through the beginner's mind. And that meant no one was happy come patch notes. That meant that minor changes like how much buff or rewards you got for creeping, or the army size, or the unit cost of certain units, or the core health, or the amount of damage, like, no, Torch, it's sadly not working. I have no idea why. Like, we can try and fix it, right? But we might struggle. Here, 1 second. Let's just say, chat. Oh, sick. It works now. We did it. We fixed it. Chat's working. Yeah, I'm seeing it and reacting to it, Torch. You just can't see it on screen. So this is the biggest problem, is that feedback never amounted to solving the problem that either group had. The strong players wanted a game that had comeback mechanics and rewarded their skill expression. And by the way, there were other things that I didn't even go into that caused this to be a problem. Like the fact that, the feedback to our feedback was too scarce too, and it didn't feel like our feedback was very useful because we didn't know what Frost Giant Studios wanted either. Yes, there were threads that had hundreds upon hundreds of posts that did everything from suggesting like, hey guys, batteries, maybe the battery shot from maybe the core should do a number of shots equal to the number of batteries required to use it. Okay, that had like 300 posts in it. And we just got, well, that was extremely useful feedback. What the fuck does that mean, extremely useful feedback, right? And also, strong players, I know, had a different, more direct outlet where they were able to express what their problems were. But frankly, their overwhelming feedback was just that is, in private conversations and in public statements, they would just say, oh, it's just so incredibly shit that there's actually no point in trying to fix it. I had one person that I was talking to say he wasn't getting paid to redesign the game mode. That was what these strong players thought was necessary for Team Mayhem to actually align, was redesigning the game mode. Now, there were other problems too that are kind of like meta considerations that we'll get into for Team Mayhem. Like, okay, can we separate this from co-op? Yeah, I probably put more effort into this analysis, one game mode, than the devs themselves. I will say, and we're going to put this towards the end of the video, right? While they were talking about Team Mayhem, I've been thinking about what a 3v3 RTS game mode would look like for literally 10 years, since Guardians of Atlas, the Day 9 RTS, as it's colloquially called, was talked about in 2016. And I, at the time, made a bunch of videos explaining how, listen, if you go on my channel and you look up, like, it was called Tempest Heroes or something before I changed the name, I basically said, guys, you could just redesign all of this mess from first principles. And my main idea was, they're making an RTS that has the skin of a MOBA. I think you have to make a MOBA that has the skin of an RTS. I will also say, because listen, most of you would never look this up, so I'm just going to take it on good faith for those of you who would look this up later, that I'm going to tell you this now ahead of time. I took, after I was involved in these playtests, and a little bit concurrent to it as well, those ideas that I had on my YouTube channel of Tempest Heroes grew and grew and grew, and I made it a custom map inside of Little Wargame with a person named Ninja5511. And we actually, some of those same names, I'll just say like the names that you mentioned, Senna, like Mixu, some of those people were involved in paid monthly tournaments, or paid bi-weekly tournaments for my version of the game mode, because I wanted to see, Frost Giant Studios is making this game mode, and I think they're fucking it up for all the reasons I spent the last hour and a half talking about. So here's what I would do differently. Here's how I would design it. I balanced it with another excellent mod maker in Little Wargame. We even had Beowulf cover one of our streams, right, for a tournament. And part of the reason that we did that, or I did that, was I thought, well, that's a lot of work to make a real game, but this is about 6 months worth of design and tournament testing effort and getting random players to play custom so that we can solve some of these problems of the high level players having different problems than the low level players, and none of which can seem to meet on any axis of whether or not it's fun. And part of the reason I'm so fucking mad at Team Mayhem, genuinely, was that after seeing all of these problems, again, I just spent an hour and a half talking about them, I did offer Frost Giant Studios, hey, would you want this? Because very politely, I'm hearing from people that they like what I'm making more than what you made. And actually, I'm hearing from these people that didn't play my mode at all and didn't get any prize money and have no otherwise incentive to participate in this. I'm hearing them say that they think your game mode is shit. I'm hearing them say that they are waiting for there to be tournaments so that they can get money off of it, but that they're not actually interested in playing it for a very long time. I'm hearing from people that they don't think that this game mode has longevity. And out of a spirit of actually, one, yes, it is self-aggrandizing. It is like improving what I'm doing and it is focused on my efforts, but also in concert with the idea that I do want Stormgate to not fall on its face and die, because frankly, a lot of people really want Stormgate to work even if it seems like it's not. I'm willing to offer up literally just 2 people doing full-time design work for 6 to 9 months, right? With some compensation one way or the other to just replace your game mode. You can take the units, you can take the abilities, you can take the map, you can take the concept, we can even help you do design and balance and all this other stuff. And they were just uninterested. Now, a question for the ages, is that because they didn't want to and thought they had that? I've heard this attitude in many other betas, but not explicitly in Stormgate of, yeah, but we were at Blizzard and who the fuck are you, right? So I didn't hear that explicitly with regards to my offer or regards to the feedback for Team Mayhem. But, I wondered if it was either a problem of they did not want that feedback and advice and they thought they could do it better themselves, or if Frost Giant Studios was just such in a downward spiral at that time that everyone knew the writing was on the wall and that all the effort gone into Team Mayhem was probably done to suit investors and to show forward progress on a promised pillar of a game mode. One area that leads me to suspect that they did this because they had to, as opposed to the feeling that Team Mayhem was ever going to actually make it, and part of the reason I feel like there was lowered effort expended on fixing and retuning and readjusting and trying to democratize the fun of Team Mayhem, is frankly that one of the investors of Frost Giant Studios is Riot, right? And I do think that trying to solve this 3v3 game mode problem is something that's very interesting for teams and for people like Riot. So I don't know if it was done because of investors and there was never a chance that it would be changed out and Frost Giant Studios knew it was not going to continue as a going concern, or if I was just an outsider and other people were just not Blizzard and we didn't get it, man. But either way, that's all I have to say about Team Mayhem, about 3v3. When I said it was stilted zaniness, what I'm getting at is it was genuinely fun between brand new players of the mode, and it was genuinely fun at like an intermediate level before this kind of metagame awareness dropped down. But a combination of a lot of systems not favoring any counterplay or comeback potential, the high level of difference in skill between the various play testers leading to troublesome feedback, and frankly the fact that they were never willing to separate Team Mayhem's balance from co-op unit balance and hero balance, all meant that it just felt like it never had a lot of legs, right? Yeah, I was playing Osu in Team Mayhem, said Senna. Oh no, what a monster. Yeah, so whether it was any of those 3 things or some other 4th thing, we'll never really know, right? Yeah, AoE dodging simulator was weird. There were a lot of nuanced things in there too, Senna, that were a bit strange. So, you don't want your heroes important because where they build and where they move. So one of the things they had in Team Mayhem was basically they had Archmage's ultimate from Warcraft 3, right? Or Scroll of Town Portal, right? But you were able to do it pretty much anywhere that you wanted to. This is another reason why you couldn't get temporary map advantages, because you would just get teleported upon, and then there was very few stuns or CCs that could prevent it, and this is extremely frustrating. There was a lot of things that became strong for metagame reasons were not satisfying to players. There was a player who made a clip of, and there was a huge argument about this, Castiel was so strong as an individual hero that, like Pokemon in every other game, the thing that starts as a DPS monster eventually realizes that it could just be a solid core of the experience and a solid core for your team. So people realized that Castiel could actually claim enough creeps and do enough team fighting by himself that you would just get all the Therium from creeps that you could to go to level 2, and you would get nothing but mass sabers. And sabers, when masked, were able to one-shot heroes in the game because they didn't have traditional levels. And obviously, this feels really bad. This is another massive point of contention between the weaker players and the stronger players. Stronger players would say, yeah, you had to do a lot in order to get that, and it's frustrating, but the game is what it is. Weaker players desperately hated this because they did not want their heroes to get nuked out of orbit. The overall strength of heroes was not Warcraft 3. It was a lot more like Zero Space from the couple dozen hours of Zero Space that I've played, right? And it just became that as the game was more and more figured out, it was less and less hospitable for the people who were interested more as like a fun gameplay experience. So, I mean, obviously, I have, yeah, Zero Space lol, says Torch, but obviously, I have a lot of ideas on how you would fix Team Mayhem 3v3, but that's a subject. I mean, frankly, that's getting too far afield because I've spent literally months trying to make what I think 3v3 should be. By the way, I will take this opportunity to just crack my fingers and be like, so, if you want to see what 3v3 I think should look like in an RTS, just hit myself up or hit up Ninja5511 for AnarKings. That's right. That's right. What's the rule that says I can't just drop what I wanted to do? Because if it weren't for some other people and maybe for the structure of the timeline, maybe you could have had AnarKings instead of Fresh Giant Studios. Don't know if it's possible, but it is possible. Oh, yeah, and Torch is telling us about the power of Fire Red, Leaf Green. Yeah, exactly. I could probably beat them with items now, but I try not to rely on items. Yeah, Nuzlockes are kind of fun. I do think that Nuzlockes kind of have a problem, which is that they're taking what is an extremely single player for fun child's game, and they're really adamant that they can make it into a different game. We'll talk about that some other time, but basically there's a huge argument in the Pokemon community about this ROM hack called Pokemon Null, and about the level that and the Pokemon Renegade Platinum Nuzlockes have, and how they're not really Pokemon games. That's extremely weird. Hi, Patams. What's really weird about Nuzlockes is I guess we'll cut this part of the video then. But what's weird about Nuzlockes is that Nuzlockes are primarily playing the Pokemon battle system, right? And that is separate from playing a Pokemon game, if that makes sense. It's really convoluted and complicated. So, overall impressions, I don't think that Team Mayhem should have seen the light of day, by the way. There was a forum post that was put out that said that one of the big criticisms of Team Mayhem was that it was just felt like a mod. And really, that might be the biggest problem with Team Mayhem, is that even if you were to account for all these things, fix the balance, adjust the player account, solve metagame problems, give more comeback utility and potential, fix some pain points and frustrations that casual players would have, which is absolutely needed in the modern day, by the way, whether you like it or not, right? Strong players are the community members, the tastemakers, the content creators for whom people stay. But if the game isn't something that appeals to casual players, they won't stay in the first place, right? So I am biased. I happen to not care how many people are playing a game if I think it's really good. See Archeron, which I'm playing a lot of right now. But that's not a successful thing to do if you're trying to recoup millions and millions of dollars. So, one of the things that is really worth mentioning about Team Mayhem, like I said, is that it just felt like a mod. The UI was a bit lacking. The gameplay experience didn't offer things that would be kind of normal now, right? Like, where was the meta progression for playing characters? Where was the reward for skins? Where were these kinds of things? They just didn't exist. They were trying to put together like a pure system, and actually this gets into a larger point that I have, and this even applies to AnarKings, is that if you don't deliberately design the game with an understanding of what the consequences are of your 3v3, 5v5, whatever your team game mode being played are, you're going to run into problems. So one of the things that they ran into is there going to be a ranked mode for Team Mayhem? Well, if there is, you automatically encourage people to play in a 3-stack on Discord call. That means playing solo queue feels fucking terrible. Are you going to restrict people from playing triple stacks with their friends? Is that going to appeal to streamers that they can't play with each other if they're too good? Are you going to have separated lobbies for those high elo or high ranked players? If you just don't do that, do only for solo queue? Is that a satisfying gameplay experience? These are things worth thinking about because I mentioned in a separate video a long time ago that I was paying attention to Zoroarts on Twitter. That seemed like a joke when Zoroarts was just some schmuck that people had not heard of who made Maki's Great Adventure, a Grand Adventure, as a platforming game. Seems pretty good now that they've made Paddle 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 and are making another quote-unquote streamer bait game, right? And these kinds of team games, they are in some way a streamer bait game. They encourage people to combine their viewing audiences by having 3 separate streams of people playing together against one another and pushing up the viewer count of your game mode. Is that something you don't want? These are very large and challenging questions that I don't think Team Mayhem ever had an intention of fixing, and the fact that co-op was on hiatus the entire time means that the balance was always going to be a bit rough and a bit scuffed. So I think that's all I have to say for Team Mayhem. Bye for now.